I wanted to talk to you today about something that's really, really important to me. You may not know this, but October 15th on the calendar is an awareness day for miscarriage and pregnancy loss. So if you have followed me long enough or you know me personally, you know that I am one of those women. I am 1 in 5 women who suffer a miscarriage, a pregnancy loss. It's a subject that is very taboo still to this day in our society, and it's something I'm very passionate about bringing awareness to and helping women with. I suffered my first miscarriage when I was just 25 years old, and I found myself very confused what was happening to me. I miscarried and didn't even realize I was miscarrying until it was over with. I didn't know much about it because I hadn't heard a lot about it. I didn't hear a lot of women talking about it. I found myself to be ashamed, embarrassed, and a failure, like so many women find themselves. A couple years later, I miscarried again, and I realized that no miscarriage is the same. You can't really compare them. I often have different women tell me, they'll try to compare their miscarriages to what I've been through, and you can tell they think, well, just based on at what point you lost your baby, that it's a greater loss. And I can honestly say I've had different variations of miscarriages and pregnancy loss, and you can't compare the two. They are, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, you wouldn't want to be in my shoes. When I had my second miscarriage, we actually knew about our pregnancy and it was looking great. We shared the news with family, and then a little while later into the pregnancy, we found out I was going to lose the baby, and I wouldn't lose that baby until a month after we were told we were going to miscarry. It was incredibly difficult and hard, and yet again, I found myself hopeless, confused, a failure, and so many other things that I couldn't put into words. After that, I had a successful pregnancy, and I had our first child, and she was a precious little girl, and she is our pride and joy, and we were so excited. It was a difficult pregnancy, but we were so excited to have her. Fast forward, our third pregnancy loss is probably the one that's most difficult for me to talk about, and one that I am passionate about sharing because I suffered an ectopic pregnancy loss, a tubal pregnancy. And that one was incredibly difficult because I was pregnant, went to the doctor, everything looked good, and just because I had had difficult pregnancies, my doctor wanted me to have blood work done every 48 hours. So fast forward a couple weeks, my doctor called me in and said something doesn't look right. I'm not sure, but I think you may be miscarrying. And so we were sent home, we were confused, we were heartbroken, we were sad. We had already shared some of our happy news with our family about my pregnancy, and things just didn't add up. They didn't make sense. And so I went back into the doctor a week later after having more blood work done, more ultrasounds, and my doctor said, well, you're very much pregnant, but we can't find your baby on the ultrasound. And your numbers are going up so slowly, we are afraid you may have a tubal pregnancy. By that point, I had done thorough research and I knew what an ectopic pregnancy was. I knew that meant the baby was not in my womb, it was somewhere else. And so I can't explain what it is to lie on the table, have an ultrasound done, and they can't find your baby. The blood work's there, they know you're pregnant, but they can't find your baby. And it's just such a confusing feeling. I felt pregnant, I had all the symptoms, but where was my baby? They couldn't even find my baby in my fallopian tubes, which is normally where a tubal pregnancy would happen. And so we made the very difficult decision, knowing completely that my baby was not in the womb, but somewhere else, and that my life was in jeopardy. And so I went through a treatment called methotrexate. And so it was a very difficult treatment that left me very sick. It is a form of chemo. And I laid on a couch for a month solid with all the pregnancy symptoms, and my HCG levels were lowering down, and they still couldn't find my baby after many, many scans. So fast forward a month later with that pregnancy, and I was on my way to the hospital. I was going in for my very last blood work, checking my HCG levels, and something felt off And so we rushed into the emergency room, and it was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. And I told them I'm being treated for a tubal pregnancy. I think my tube ruptured. They did some scans and they said, well, we can't find your baby, and it doesn't look like your tube ruptured. And so I laid for 3 days in a hospital and bled internally, was misdiagnosed again for treatment under a different doctor's orders, rushed into emergency surgery because I was internally bleeding so bad. And they, before I was into surgery and I signed the papers, I said, I really think my tube ruptured. And they said, no, we think this is a cyst. And so I signed on the consent form that if I said, well, what do you do if you find my baby in there? And they said, we're not going to find your baby. And so I went to surgery. When I woke up, my tube had ruptured. And my baby, my Noah, he had grown to 12 weeks. He was hiding up in by my ovaries, so that's why they couldn't find him in the scan. And my tube ruptured, and I almost lost my life, but ultimately I lost Noah. And when I didn't sign the consent forms, they disposed of my baby. It's very difficult to this day. I was very upset to know my baby could be thrown away. And when I inquired about it later, it was one of those things where they just brushed it off and said he was nothing, he was just cells. And to this day, that's why I'm so passionate about the subject of pro-life. It's very difficult until you've been in someone's shoes like mine and you haven't experienced those kind of losses to be told your baby was nothing. After that, I miscarried a couple months later. I got pregnant and I had the blood work done, making sure I didn't have a tubal pregnancy. And they said, well, you don't have a tubal pregnancy. I'm like, oh, good. And then my numbers dropped and I lost that baby. And it was incredibly confusing and difficult. I don't share my stories for sympathy because if we're honest, we know every one of us bears different burdens. It's my burden in life. I don't share it for your sympathy. I don't share it for attention. I don't share it to be dramatic. I share it because I believe I'm supposed to. And one thing I believe about miscarriage and pregnancy loss is that women are scared to talk about it because there's a lot of shame around it, a lot of embarrassment because you feel like a failure. Or people don't talk about it because it's an embarrassing thing to talk about. It's a very private matter to talk about. I have had women reach out to me who have not shared about their pregnancy loss with their parents or their friends. I've even had somebody share the pregnancy loss and didn't want to tell her husband because she was so embarrassed about it and she was scared to tell him. Some women don't share about their pregnancy loss because they're afraid to open up and be vulnerable because they don't want hurtful things said to them. I can honestly say I've heard the hurtful things. You'll see your baby again someday. You weren't really pregnant. You'll get over it. You'll have another baby. You have a baby. Just be happy that you have her. I've had family members never acknowledge my pregnancy loss. They like to hide behind the excuse of, I don't know what to say. And I'm not here to go after those people. I'm not here to go after the hurtful things that are said to me. Sometimes people say things because they think they're helping and they're scared they're going to say the wrong thing. And sometimes they do say the wrong thing. I've had people, good people in my life, who have told me, just don't share about your pregnancy until you know it's a healthy, successful pregnancy. By that statement, you're addressing the idea of, well, don't talk about your miscarriage if you happen to have one because you weren't really pregnant. It's one of those things, it's uncomfortable and it's awkward. What I want to say is if you know someone personally from a distance and they share that they have suffered a miscarriage or a pregnancy loss and you don't know what to say because you've never been through one and it's awkward, acknowledge their loss. Acknowledge that they lost someone. It's very difficult to lose a baby and not have a place to bury them and not have a place to go to not be able to have a funeral. You know, we have a name for people who have lost a parent, someone who's lost a spouse, but there's not a description to name someone who's lost a baby in the womb. Acknowledge their loss if they talk about it. All saying, I'm so sorry for your loss goes a long way. If it's someone you know really well, do something for them. Drop off flowers on their doorstep. Maybe send them a gift card for coffee. Do something to acknowledge the loss. And as I can say, if you don't know what to say, not saying anything at all is like saying, I don't care. And it is a grief. It is a loss. There's so much to it that I can't put into words because of how painful it is. You are emotionally grieving and you're physically grieving, and you can have everybody tell you in the world that you're not a failure, that it wasn't your fault. But trust me, you play the mind games, the what if games. So I just want to encourage you today. I wanted to talk about my stories because if we don't talk about our stories, then we're not bringing awareness to it. And some women choose not to open up about it, and it's your decision. And I know a lot of women who don't, and I respect them for that. If you choose to share that you have lost a baby, don't be embarrassed about it. Let people love you. Be open to people and their kindness. Turn off the people who don't say the right things, and understand that some people say the wrong things and they don't mean to. And if somebody doesn't show you any kindness and they can't acknowledge your loss, well, I think you figure out what to do with those types of people. They tell you if you matter or not. But most importantly, one thing I can say is nobody is going to say the right thing to you to bring you comfort. Nobody's going to do the right thing to make you completely better. There's only one that does that. And I have learned that time and time over again. And that's my relationship with God. So there's a book I love to share with women about pregnancy loss. It has really helped me in different pregnancy losses I've had. I have found sometimes music helps me, sometimes no music, no reading, just walks out in nature, breathing, eating right, just taking a time to just really accept my loss. I can't say I'm just this happy person that it doesn't hurt anymore. I have 2 beautiful children that I love so much, and I'm very blessed to have them. They are my pride and joy. But there is not a day that goes by that I don't think about my 4 babies in heaven. I know I'll see them again. That brings comfort to me often, but I often, when their due dates come or the anniversary of me losing them, those are difficult days. I still remember them and grieve them. And that's okay. If you find yourself a couple months later, a couple years later, even a couple decades later, and you're still grieving your pregnancy losses, that's perfectly normal. You're a mom. And whether you have any children here living on earth, when you have a baby in your womb, you're a mother, and acknowledge that. Please know I'm here if you ever need somebody to talk to. Though I haven't been through your specific pregnancy loss, I do know what it's like to feel like a failure. I do know what it's like to play the what if game. I do know what it's like to grieve and feel very alone. And I'd love to help you. I'd love to be a listening ear, or I'd love to be somebody that can help encourage you and tell you some different things that have helped me along the way. May we all bring awareness to this day and acknowledge the women in our lives who have lost babies here. And may we be light to them and speak some comfort to them and be a shoulder for them to cry on. And if you're somebody that you're still have never shared your pregnancy loss, know that's okay. But know you can do what's best for you. Know that we are with you. We're so sorry for your loss. You're not alone. And may you have better days ahead.